Okay, continuing on, the questions that are posed to TIR on a regular basis, which end does the pressure line go on? Does it go on the solenoid side or does it go on the pressure regulator side? As I said in the previous video, fluid is going to flow in the path of least resistance. If we put the input supply side of the pump on the pressure regulator, as we close the pressure regulator, it's going to build pressure between the regulator and the pump, but once it gets through the pressure regulator, we're now free flowing as though it would be going back to tank, so you're not going to have pressure on your solenoids. So basically, you always put the supply side onto our solenoid valves, which then will run into a pressure regulator so that the pressure is built up here. Another question we get is people say, I can't get my system to build any pressure. We're going to go through that in a minute, but the first, I'll say one of the more common causes is confusion about where to hook this nylon tube. The nylon tube needs to be hooked on the pressure side of the system versus the return side. If this nylon tube is hooked on the back side of the regulator, all we're measuring is how much free flow pressure is going back to the tank. So again, the pressure is measured over here. Check and make sure that this fitting is here. One thing that you can check also is you're getting absolutely no pressure on your gauge. Take this fitting apart and make sure that there's no blockage. There should be a small hole and no blockage in this fitting going down into the supply side. Another one, people will say, well, my system will build pressure when I hold the switch and then it falls off. This is a butterfly, so that as the butterfly actually is parallel to the flow, you're going to have the least amount of pressure. As it closes perpendicular to the flow, you're going to have the greatest amount of pressure. Once it hits that point, it will continue to spin and open back up, so your pressure is going to fall off again. Another question we get all too frequently is, my system will basically start spraying and then it just begins to shut down. Solenoids, ball valves, and otherwise, they're designed to simply open and close. If they opened, they are more than likely still open. The lack of flow is somewhere related to the pump, and in many cases, it's the pump begins to become starved for fluid. So as it runs out of fluid to pump through and create flow and pressure, it's going to basically taper down and only have air going through here, and thus you see your spray come on very hard and then it just withers down to nothing. So things to check at that point would be your strainer on your input side that typically are installed, or possibly this green hose you see is actually a specified suction line hose. It's designed to hold open as the internal pressure wants to collapse it. Many times, and I'm guilty as well, of using the standard pressure line as a suction line. Over time, these will break down and they will literally begin to collapse, and then it becomes self-fulfilling in that as it collapses, it creates more pressure sucking through, and it pulls it down further to where eventually it will become flexible enough that that line will collapse down and shut off all of the free flow going into the pump. So those conclude the typical questions that we receive as far as on pressure and my system working in that. I went over some of the basics on the solenoid valves. You can review that one and tie that back into it. And I will point out that on a TIR system, if you get into the solenoids, you can work everything on our solenoid systems with these 4 screws. You don't need to worry about working with the plumbing unless you've got a leak somewhere down here in the plumbing. If you think it's on the solenoid side, you can simply remove everything and work right off of this. It's a whole lot faster. So with that, we'll get into the actual hands-on in the next video. Thank you.
Texas Industrial Remcor, quality valves and controls today and tomorrow.